The election of Jeremy Corbyn to be the head of the UK's Labour Party is already paying off, at the very least, for that party, with their membership rolls soaring to at least recent historical highs. Now, his success in the near future in terms of being able to get his policies put into practice is still a little bit up for debate, and he is a controversial figure, which we're going to talk about a little bit in this clip, but the numbers certainly are good, at least over the past few weeks. The latest numbers released by Labour show that 62,000 people have joined it in the week since Saturday, 12 of September. This compares to less than 62,000 people who are members of the Liberal Democrats, according to figures last released in June. Total party membership is now around 380,000, so that's a significant portion of that, actually. The figure is approaching the 400,000 figure recorded at the 1997 election, although in previous decades, quite a bit ago, they had close to 1 million members. So it's still not at historic highs necessarily.
So even if you're not from Great Britain and you don't know about the Liberal Democrats, a lot of people know the Green Party. And so you would think if you're very liberal, you might be in favor of the Green Party, but they have 67,000 members, which again is very similar to the number that signed up for the Labour Party just after Corbyn got elected.
2 to 3 weeks, yeah.
Right. So to be the leader of Labour. Now, of course, Labour is a much larger party historically in the UK, and so you have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's the overall theme here is indisputable, which is this is a trend. I mean, this is a trend worldwide, whether it's the Greeks, it's here, Bernie Sanders' popularity here in the US, it's Jeremy Corbyn, it's Canada, in Alberta, Liberals winning in Alberta. For those of you not familiar with politics of Canada, that's amazing. It's unprecedented, right? The left is surging. There's a very good reason why. But now let's tell you about who Corbyn is if you're not familiar with him, and then we'll explain how he fits into this puzzle. Yeah,
really fast, just this seems to be a clear trend. One person isn't buying it. You might remember this name. This is Tony Blair. If Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader, this is written right before the election, it won't be a defeat like 1983 or 2015 at the next election. It will mean rout, possibly annihilation. Well, now we're going to look at some of his policy positions, and maybe we can decide if they're going to literally be annihilated.
Well, of course, if you know some of those positions, you know that what Tony Blair is actually worried about is his own annihilation, because Corbyn believes that he should be arrested for war crimes.
Yeah.
So Tony Blair's like, I do declare, it's a very good idea to put Corbyn in charge. Yeah, because you're looking at a jail cell. So could you imagine?
Cheney would be like, what? That can't be right. He may not visit London anytime soon.
Well, but again, this is why people are tired of the Obamas and the Hillary Clintons and the Tony Blairs and all these lukewarm progressives that aren't really progressive. They hijack the progressive parties in their respective countries and turn them into another way of serving the corporate interests, right? And people are tired of being crushed by that corporate machine. So now let's go to Corbyn's policy so you get a sense of what they actually are interested in.
Yeah, so we've got policies in a number of different categories, and understand, obviously, very different political context over in the UK. I think some of these we're probably going to like, but there are some in this list that I don't expect Cenk will actually approve of. Let's see. Corbyn's policy platform includes renationalizing Britain's railroad system and energy companies, abolishing tuition for British universities, and imposing rent controls to deal with Britain's affordable housing problem. So some of those sound like you might hear Bernie Sanders talking about in this country.
But that's definitely to the left of Bernie Sanders.
A little bit. I mean, he's talked about making the free public college tuition. That is something. I don't know, but he hasn't talked about rent controls necessarily, but I could use it.
And you're right. Look, I think the surge of the left throughout the world is a great thing overall, but as a balancing measure. Am I that far left? No, I'm not. I'm just not, right? So it would... free universities, that idea I love. And so maybe I'm biased here because my dad got a free education. Otherwise, I'd be an olive farmer in southeastern Turkey, right? So free education, exactly. The Turkish version of, okay. So free education makes all the difference. It's opportunity, et cetera. Rent control, that hasn't worked out that well. It's got a bad history and...
It's true, but we got some fucking problems in America in terms of rent. I was reading an editorial.
Is too damn high.
It is too damn high, and it's unlikely to go down in the future.
I know, but price controls have never worked. It's a terrible idea, if you ask me. But when it comes to economics, I'm much more centrist, even maybe center-right. So, but as much as I like Corbyn, I don't agree with that. Would I vote for him?
Yeah.
You show me the alternatives. Given the alternatives, certainly. And the central component, which we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. He's open to reopening the coal mines that used to be a big part of Britain's economy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know too much about Britain's capacity for alternative energy sources at this point in terms of being able to power their entire nation's grid. I wouldn't want them to go back in the direction of coal, though. That doesn't seem like a good thing.
So I think what he's doing there is, A, he's being populist, B, he's saying, I'm going to bring you your jobs.
Yeah, I get that.
But C, more importantly than that, he's actually using an old right-wing trick from here in America, which is, I'm going to bring you back to the good old days. Remember when Britain was doing well, and you remember your childhood when we had the coal mines? Yeah, I know we had issues, but you loved your childhood, didn't you? I'm going to bring you back to that time.
Yeah. They're going to colonize India next week.
Yeah, it's a very clever, that's funny. We're a very clever political strategy. Right?
Yeah. Okay, he wants to, I think you're going to like some of these. He wants to end Britain's austerity spending cuts. He also proposes something called People's Quantitative Easing, in which the Bank of England would print money to invest in infrastructure projects.
Now, if they didn't do quantitative easing in other ways, I'd say, whoa, don't be crazy. Don't print money. I mean, that's going to lead to inflation, et cetera, to pay for... No, I would never want to be... Except for the fact that they do quantitative easing already, and instead of paying for things that the people need and the public need, they just give it to the bankers at nearly 0% interest rate.
Yeah.
Well, that's a goddamn crime, right?
I prefer their version to ours in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, so you want to do people's quantitative easing is better than the quantitative easing we have now. So look, I know that what the Fed does and what he wants to do here, it's a little more complicated than the simplistic way we've broken it down here. And I know the point is for the banks to go out there and lend the money to other people and stimulate the economy. I understand all that, but nonetheless, they get the trillions of dollars at nearly 0% interest rate. You give me trillions, billions, millions at 0% interest rate, I can make a lot of money too.
That's true. Yeah, someday those banks are going to loan that money out. Okay, now let's turn to foreign policy. He wants to withdraw from NATO and abolish the UK's nuclear arsenal, and has suggested that Blair could face a war crimes trial for his role in the Iraq War. He's looking backwards. He's written that Russian expansionism is not unprovoked, and that the obsession with Cold War politics that exercises the NATO and EU leaderships is fueling the crisis. He has also in the past, in at least one speech, referred to both Hamas and Hezbollah as friends of Britain.
So that I dismiss entirely. The reason is, he's like, we should invite our friends in Hezbollah and our friends in Hamas. It was a matter of speaking.
Yes.
And he says, now look, of course I didn't mean they're my friends, right? I meant we should negotiate with the other side. They're the other side, so we should negotiate. I agree with that.
Agreed.
Now, on the Russia story, I think he's being a little naive about Russia. But you want to negotiate with Russia? I'm all for that. I believe in negotiation. I don't think you should go blitzkrieging into eastern Ukraine to show Putin who's boss, right? Do I believe in getting rid of the nuclear arsenal? No, I don't. Okay, so that makes me a bad lib. But if I was Great Britain, I wouldn't do that. On the other hand, should people who invaded Iraq under false pretenses and then committed war crimes be held accountable? Yeah, that's what war crimes are about.
Yeah.
Right, and if you're going to go after the lowly soldiers who did it, or and at Abu Ghraib, we put away some people for torture, but we have the memos that go all the way up to the top that says take the gloves off and start doing these kind of practices. Yeah. So why did we never prosecute those guys?
And fair is fair. If you were to lock up a few of the people who obviously lied multiple countries into going to war, maybe in the future politicians would think twice before lying to us about something as significant as a more than a decade-long, multi-trillion-dollar series of wars throughout the Middle East.
So I totally agree with that. I definitely would not withdraw from NATO.
No.
So there's a lot I disagree with Corbyn on. But overall, given the status quo, would I rather keep voting for an establishment candidate that's going to keep on doing the same things that they've been doing, or someone who's going to shake the system up? I'm going to vote for shaking it up.
Yeah, now, again, it remains to be seen how successful he will be in taking his coalition together and actually getting his legislative goals accomplished. I've been looking over some of the recent polling, and generally, when a new leader is elected to a party, there tends to be this significant bump in the same way that our presidential elections have it. His was minor, if not non-existent, which generally is not the case. And his popularity on a number of different issues is very low. Now, he's obviously popular enough that his party did quite well, and he did quite well. But there are some issues, especially the economic policies, which I would have imagined Britain would be a fan of this, considering the damage that austerity has done to Britain, at least from our perspective. But he doesn't seem to be very popular on those issues, not at present.
All right, so let me say two things about that. First of all, the central theme is he's against austerity. And lots of parts of Europe, including the UK, are sick of austerity, right? Mm-hmm. So that message will resonate. That's why he's popular. It's not like people voted for him, even within the Labour Party, like, oh, can't wait to get out of NATO. Yeah, I'm going to go with this guy, right? Yeah. Or I particularly agree with his views on Hezbollah or whatever it is, right? No, they hate austerity. That's why they voted for him. Yeah. That's the central thesis. And you were right about that central thesis. So now, a couple months ago, does he have a chance? That's a big question. A couple months ago, the odds makers, according to at least Vox in the article that I read, would have put Corbyn at 100 to 1 to win the leadership of Labour. Wow, they would have lost a lot of money, right? Yeah. And so can he win overall? Well, I think the answer is yes. I'm not saying he will win overall. I'm saying he certainly can win, and they are grossly underestimating him. Okay, number one, they're underestimating people's, how they're repulsed by the establishment. That's true here in the U.S., it's true in the UK, and the establishment keeps underestimating, right? Number two, he's running a super populist campaign, which is very smart. So that coal mines thing, it seems like a weird throwback to us, but I actually think that it's really smart politics in a way that's subconscious in a sense. And he's coming out strong. People love strong politicians. They're used to associating the left with weakness, right? It drives us crazy that's the association, but that's what the propaganda has been in both sides of the Atlantic. And he's saying, well, yeah, you want to see strong? I'll show you strong, right? And that resonates. Yeah. And so combine that with the fact that the UK is sick of austerity, they like his central idea, and he's doing all these other things right. I mean, if you're discounting him, I think you're making a terrible mistake, right? And maybe I hope you continue to make that mistake so he can win, and we can get different leadership, even if I don't agree with some of what he says.